good morning to those of you who have joined this morning to talk and hear from Ron Ricard, who's a 1031. I call you an expert. I think you're an expert. So he's going to talk to you about all things 1031, kind of what's happened this year. What does 2021 maybe look like? I say maybe because at this point, who knows anymore? So he's going to do that. If you have any questions, please put them into the chat box or the Q&A box. We're going to save everything to the end so that Ron can get through everything, and then maybe your question will get answered. And then I'll come on and go ahead and go through that Q&A. So welcome, Ron, and it's all yours.
Thank you very much for having me. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share here and have my PowerPoint up. For those of you whom I've not had the pleasure to meet in person yet, my name is Ron Ricard with IPX 1031. Been a longtime SCORE member here, almost 20 years, and doing exchanges for people. And what I'm going to focus on, here we go. What I'm going to try and focus on primarily, we are definitely going to go through the 1031 process. I'm going to, as I'm going through that, I'll definitely be highlighting what some of the things I'm seeing lately, some strategies we can use for people who are doing exchanges, or for people who have highly appreciated other residences and stuff. At the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about exit strategies and why people do exchanges. When I get to that point, I'm also going to kind of go into what I'm seeing is happening in the market today, because I'm definitely seeing certain shifts in what people are buying in replacement, what kinds of properties, what markets seem to be hotter than others, and I'll talk about that at the end. What I'm going to start with, though, are the questions that I'm getting today. There are 3 questions that seem to be answering in grand numbers these days. First is about Prop 19, what effect we think that will have. Second question is, with Biden coming in, there have been a lot of rumors, a lot of incorrect rumors, I will add, with what's happening with his tax plan and exchanges and real estate. And then lastly, I'm also often getting questions with regard to extensions and 1031 exchanges, because there have been some extensions in the past. Some have expired, some may still be going, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So let's start with Prop 19. I'm getting the question a lot: what does Prop 19 mean to 1031 exchanges and investment real estate? And the answer is, I don't think very much. Prop 19 has 2 major components to it, and I'm not going to delve into Prop 19. I'm sure you guys have had plenty on that. But the first thing that's popping up a lot about Prop 19 is that it's basically an extension of Prop 90, in the sense that you can move your primary residence to anywhere in California now and get a lot more flexible tax treatment. But the key here is, it is more on primary residences. It is not for investment real estate. So that aspect to it, other than the fact that we may get more inventory because more people are going to sell their houses, that aspect really does not change what I expect to see with 1031 exchanges and investment real estate. The other aspect is the fact that when it comes to the parent-child or parent-to-grandchild transfer, has now been really cut into a small fraction of what it was. So what do I expect that to mean? What I expect that to mean is that I think you're going to see a lot more people selling property once they inherit the property, because they can no longer afford the higher property taxes, or no longer want to pay the higher property taxes. A lot of time people would keep property in the family for a long time because they can keep very, very low property tax bases. That's going to be gone for many, many people. So I expect to see more real estate gone. But since people get a step up in basis when they inherit property, I don't expect many of them to do exchanges. I don't expect many of them to do 1031s. I would expect most of them are just going to be sold and cashed out. So bottom line is, I don't think 1031 exchanges is going to be very much affected by Prop 19. I may be surprised. But I don't think that's going to be the case. I do think it will increase the amount of inventory out there. I do think it will make real estate, a little more active, a little more inventory. But again, I don't think it's going to work. It's going to be that big of a deal when it comes to investors. All right, second thing with regard to Biden coming in, I'm getting calls every day. Is Biden going to do away with 1031 exchanges, et cetera? The answer is no, for a couple of things. First off, is there has been some discussion as part of a grand green strategy to pay for a grand green strategy. 1031 was mentioned. What was discussed, though, was not an elimination of exchanges, but a limit of 1031 to people under a certain income level, $400,000. However, that is not going to happen for a couple of reasons. One is financial advisors do not believe in the elimination of 1031 exchanges. So even internally, it's not going to be something that gets a lot of traction. Also, tax reform itself is not high on Biden's list. We've seen his 180 his first 100-day plan. It has nothing to do with taxes. So I really do not expect any major changes to the 1031 rules. I would be very surprised if there's any big tax plan this year. At most, he might do some kind of repeal of the 2017 tax cut. But remember, the 2017 tax cuts had nothing to do with capital gain taxes, had more to do with corporate taxes, really, than anything else. Lastly, my expectation is the Republicans are going to keep the House because I can't see both seats in Georgia going to the Democrats. So if the Republicans keep the Senate, then I just don't see any major legislation passing at all for the first couple of years. So bottom line is, don't expect major changes to the 1031 rules, to any of the tax rules that we are currently working with. Plan status quo for at least the first year, if not the first couple of years. Lastly, extensions. So there are some provisions. Occasionally, the IRS will issue extensions when it comes to 1031 exchanges, and since now we're back into a more severe shelter in place, I'm getting the question a lot: are there still extensions being provided for 1031 exchanges with regard to these extensions? So let me kind of go back a little bit in history. Back in March, when the first shelter in place took effect, about the first week of April, the IRS did issue extensions, and the IRS has the ability to issue extensions for a federally declared disaster. Typically, it's a very specific issue, like or earthquake, fires, tornado, hurricane, that kind of stuff. This was the first time they've ever issued a national extension policy based on the shelter in place that started back in March. But what they did is they essentially extended everyone's deadlines to a specific date. The key here is in July, these all expired. And when they expired, the IRS said very clearly there would not be any more extensions based on our shelter in place, coronavirus, COVID, whatever you want to call it. There will not be additional extensions given because of that. Now, what happened was in August, we had a lot of counties in Northern California and Southern California, but in Northern California especially, that were affected by wildfires. And the counties that were affected by wildfires actually got some extension relief. And late in the game, Santa Clara was actually added to that list. Again, though, the way those were worded, those all expired by the 1st of November. So bottom line is we are not having any extensions. And more importantly, your clients cannot individually ask for extensions when it comes to their personal situation. So if they are having trouble getting out, going to see properties or whatever, IRS does not care. You are bound by the same regular 45 and 180-day deadlines as an irregular exchange. So um, obviously, I'm going through this very quickly. Normally, I do this in front of an audience where I can see if people have questions or if there's something that's not clear. I can't do that right now. If there's anything about these topics that I've talked about so far that are not clear to you, put them in the chat box, call me, email me. I'm here to answer questions and be a resource for you guys. So, but that's where we are today as far as some of the hot topics that people have been asking me about and what I see happening early in next year. Again, later on in the talk, I will give a little bit about what is happening with where people are buying, what's happening with 1031 exchanges in general, and how to use that possibly for marketing going forward. All right, so let's go back kind of and just start at the very beginning of exchanges. As most of you probably know, 1031 is a section of the tax code that allows you to sell investment real estate and use that money to buy other investment real estate. So you go through the regular sales process. At the close of escrow, the money comes to a third party. That's the intermediary, that's us. You then help them find the replacement property. And our job is just to hold the money between when they sell the property and when they buy the property. Remember, 1031 only defers the taxes. It does not eliminate the taxes. So if you sell a house and buy a duplex and later you sell that duplex, you pay taxes from the house and the duplex. Now you can keep exchanging the rest of your life. One thing, I get the question often, why bother doing an exchange if I'm only deferring the taxes? There are two reasons we always encourage our clients to do an exchange. Number one, would you prefer to pay your taxes today or tomorrow? For most of us, the answer is going to be tomorrow. If that's the case, then the way I look at it is if I make $300,000 of profit on a property and I got to pay $100 to the government, by doing an exchange, I don't have to pay that $100 to the government. I can use all $300 to go buy other real estate. So by not paying the government, you get to use that money to buy more and bigger real estate. But the real reason people do an exchange is because ultimately, sadly, one day we're all going to die. And when you die, whoever inherits the property from you gets what's called a step up in tax basis. And that step up in tax basis is really the beautiful thing about our tax code. So let's say you bought the property for $100,000, say it's worth $1 million, you die, it goes to your kids. Their basis on the property is $1 million. So that $900,000 of profit that you would have had to pay tax on, that all disappears. And therefore the kid can sell the property the day after your funeral. And when they receive that property for $100,000, when they sell that property for $1 million, they have zero profit and do not have to pay any taxes at all. By the way, side note about this, I get people who are asking me about Prop 19, where they're talking about gifting the real estate to their kids now before February 15th so that they could pass on the property tax base. Remember, if you're gifting real estate to somebody, then you are giving them your capital gains tax liability. So if the day before you die, you give your kid that $1 million property, they will then now have a $900,000 gain when they sell that property. Now, when you inherit it, you get that step up in basis, but you do not get that step up in basis by gifting real estate. So be very careful about that. This is also why if any of your clients want to talk about giving real estate to kids or family members before they die, make sure they talk to a good accountant and or a state attorney, because you're often giving your kids a very large tax liability. All right, there's a term we hear in 1031 all the time, like kind, which is selling what's got to be like kind. And the key is this: it can be any investment real estate for any other investment real estate. You can sell a house to buy a shopping center. You can sell a farm to buy a fourplex. You can sell bare land and buy commercial real estate or residential real estate. As long as what you're selling and buying is business or investment real estate, it can be any kind of real estate. Don't get focused on that term like kind. Like the term like kind was relevant a few years ago when we used to do what are called personal property exchange. So if you sold an airplane, you had to buy an airplane. If you sold farm equipment, you had to buy farm equipment. If you sold a cow, you had to buy a cow. That's what like kind referred to. But as of 2017, all personal property exchanges disappeared. Now 1031 is only about investment real estate. But again, it can be any kind of investment real estate for any other kind anywhere in the United States. So don't get too hung up about that. Now, of course, I said it does have to be investment real estate. So what about my primary residence? Well, your primary residence has a completely different tax rules called Section 121. And that says if you've lived in the property at least 2 years, then you get this automatic exemption. $250,000 if you're single, $500,000 if you're married. Around here, though, that's not necessarily that much gain. I often talk to people who have $2, $3, $4 million or more. I talked to a guy yesterday, he has a $12 million gain in his primary residence. I'd love to have that problem. But the question there is, if the gain is that much more, is there anything they can do to not pay taxes on their excess gain? And the answer is yeah, there are a couple of options. Now, years ago, when you sold your primary residence, you just needed to go buy another primary residence to defer your taxes. That's gone. That hasn't been the case in over 20 years. Now, whenever you sell your primary residence, you have a taxable liability right then and there. But there is a way around taking care of highly appreciated primary residences. First is there any portion of the property that you are already declaring to the IRS as business or investment property? I'm sure many of you at home, or many of you who are listening to this, have a home office. Okay, if you have a home office, then you may, hopefully, are showing the IRS that a percentage of your property is today being treated as business property. ADUs, really common right now. People renting out the basement. Sometimes people will even rent out rooms out of their house. Again, the key here is, what are you reporting to the IRS? If you are reporting to the IRS that 20% of your house is business property or is rented out, then you could take 20% of your sales price and do an exchange with it. So using this example, you got $1 million property selling, you're reporting 20% of it as a home office, $200,000 goes into the 1031 exchange, and against the other 80%, you still get the full 800, or still get the full $500 or $250,000 exemption against it. So it is possible for people today, if this is how they're showing their property, that they can take advantage of 1031 and primary residences. But what about if you don't have a home office? What about if you don't rent out or have an ADU? It's all your primary residence. What else can you do? Move out. Turn your house into a rental. Now, after you've been renting the house out for a couple of years, is that house now an investment? Yes. Is that house still considered to be a primary residence? Yes, because you still meet the criteria of having lived in the property 2 of the last 5 years. As long as you meet that criteria, 2 of the last 5 years. So if it's been less than 3 years since you moved out when you sold that property, the property still qualifies as a primary residence. So you could take advantage of both tax rules at the same time. This morning, I was talking to an agent out in Palo Alto, and his client did this, and the agent didn't even know it. Didn't even know they could take advantage of it. So they're selling the property for $2.7 million. They're going to get the the $500,000 exemption, and they will take the remaining $2.2 million to go into the exchange. So that's the key. You are not just deferring the excess gain. You are deferring everything minus the exemption is going to go into the 1031. Also, remember, with that money, you got to buy other investment real estate. You're not doing this to buy another primary residence. So this is a way, if your client is moving into a vacation home, or they're going to assisted living or senior complex, or they have a second home they want to move into or something, this is a way for them to be able to take advantage of the 1031 exchange and still get their $500,000 exclusion and not pay a huge bill to the tax guys, to the FTB and the IRS. So primary residence, this is very, very common. I'm doing these probably a couple times a week easily, and I'm seeing more and more people to do this. So if you are working with clients with a highly appreciated primary residence, this is something to discuss with them if one of their reasons for not selling is because they are afraid of a large tax liability. All right. What other kinds of properties don't qualify for 1031? Second homes, very important here. Second homes are not investment real estate. Second homes are considered to be personal use, and therefore, when you sell a second home, you are going to pay taxes on all of your gain. Now, the term second home is actually a lot more broad than most people think it is. It's any property used by you or your family. So, what about if you have a kid living in your house? Is that investment property? It is if the kid is being treated like a regular tenant and paying market rate rent. If you have a family member living in the property and they're not paying market rate rent to the IRS, it's not investment real estate and therefore does not qualify for exchanges. So be real careful when you're talking to people who are selling property that their kids have been living there. The first question I always ask is, are you charging them market rate rent? If the answer is yes, great. If the answer is no, they better go talk to their accountant. Flipping real estate. Flipping real estate also not 1031 exchange. It's not considered to be investment real estate. Flipping real estate is considered to be property held for resale, not property held for investment. So you buy it, fix it, sell it, you're going to pay ordinary income tax on any profit that you've made. Similarly, development. You buy a beat up whole piece of property, you bulldoze it, put a house on there and sell it. That's a development. That's not investment. Developing real estate, not considered to be investment real estate. Typically, we think of investment real estate as something you're getting rental income from, or you're running your business from there, like your home office. Bare land is considered to be investment because it's considered to be held for appreciation purposes. But again, the key here is that it is that what you sell and what you buy both have to be investment real estate. So hopefully that talks about like kind and clarifies that. All right. So for those of you, I know I got a bunch of people on the phone or on the line here. I'm sure a few of you are relatively new to real estate, new to 1031 exchanges. If you've never been through one before, what is your role if your seller wants to do an exchange? And the answer is very little. You are going to go through the regular sales process of listing that property, finding a buyer, going into contract, opening escrow at your favorite title company. Everything is exactly the same. There are only three little tiny things I want you to do if your client wants to do the exchange. Number one, educate the client. Please make sure the client knows the 1031 rules. I have brochures you can give them. I have stuff you can email them. I can get on a conference call with your client. You can give your client my phone number. Make sure they know what they're doing. I'm happy to talk to your client even before you take the listing. Sometimes putting them at ease about the 1031 process makes it more likely that they're going to do an exchange or sell the property than do an exchange. So just make sure the client understands what the rules are of the 1031. Number two, you do need to disclose it to the buyer. Typically, we think of the cooperation clause, seller to do 1031 or buyer to cooperate with seller's 1031 exchange. If you aren't sure what to put, there's a CAR form, the seller's intent to exchange addendum. So you can use that as well. So the key here is you're just disclosing to the buyer that the seller is doing an exchange. It has zero effect on the buyer. So if you are representing the buyer and the seller says, hey, we're doing an exchange, you can tell your buyer, don't worry about it. Now, if they want to ask for an extension or something, that's a contingency that you need to negotiate. But that the fact that they're doing an exchange has zero effect on the other party. Lastly, please remember to get an intermediary involved before escrow closes. I've had two situations just this week where escrow closed and nobody knew that the seller wanted to do an exchange. Nobody asked the question. Escrow closes. I get a call from the seller. Hey, where's my, where's my 1031? I go, too late. Close escrow. You got to call us before escrow closes because escrow has to have the instructions on what to do with the money, specifically that the money comes to us. So unfortunately, if you close escrow, it's too late. So get us involved before escrow closes. But other than that, everything else about your listing the property is exactly like any other listing. All right, a couple of things here when it comes to exchanges. The timeline's really critical. This is probably the area that trips up people the most when it comes to 1031. And again, assuming there are no extensions like we talked about earlier, you got 45 days to identify what you're going to buy, 180 days to close escrow, 45 days to tell us what you're going to buy, 6 months to actually close it. What does identify mean? I'll get into how many you can identify in just a minute, but identify means you're giving us the address to what you're going to buy. I'm going to buy 123 Saratoga Avenue. I'm going to buy 415 North Main Street, unit number 2. It's the exact property you're buying. During the 45 days, you can change your mind as much as you want, but once midnight strikes on the 45th day, whatever you have identified, you are locked into. You have to buy from that list within the 180 days. If you do not, then you do not have a valid exchange. Okay. And if the 45th day falls on a weekend, that is your deadline. You do not get the next business day. So again, if you're new to 1031s and the timing, this far and away is the area that trips up the most people. You got to know what you're going to buy within 45 days. Both of these clocks start the day escrow closes. So that brings up a couple points. Is there anything we can do to mitigate this 45 days? A couple things. First off, remember that the clock only starts at the close of escrow. Ask for longer escrows. If you got a seller who is worried about not finding a replacement property, ask for a 45-day escrow. Ask for a 60-day escrow. Ask for an option to extend the escrow by 30 days. I just got a contract seller to extend, if he wants to. You need to negotiate that if you're going to do it. But the key is, the longer you have before escrow closes, the longer before the 45-day clock starts. Now, I will say also there is another semi-foolproof way of getting around this 45 days. There is something called a reverse exchange. A reverse exchange is exactly what it sounds like. I want to buy first and then sell. I'm getting this. I get this question a lot. Right now, I have an entire division. That's all they do is reverse exchanges. They're setting records in terms of how many of these we are opening up right now. Because I got a lot of clients who are saying, hey, I want to go buy my property first because I know I can sell mine and there's very little inventory, so I want to go find it first. I am not going to go into the details of reverse exchanges. Know a couple things. One is it's a lot more expensive. It can cost $6,000 to $10,000, sometimes even more. Second thing is the client has to have the money because lending is not easy when it comes to a reverse exchange. So again, I'm not going to get into the details. If you got a client who wants to talk reverse exchanges, give me a call. But the key here is that normally you're going to sell first and then buy. If you want to buy first, give me a call. All right. How many properties can you identify? I'm not going to go into this too deeply. Most people identify under the 3-property rule, which means you can identify up to 3 properties. If you want to identify more than 3 properties, there is a way to do that. Now you're at a dollar limit. So if you sell your property for $1 million, you can identify 200% or 2 times that. So you can identify $2 million worth of property. So 3 properties or fewer, no dollar limit. More than 3, now you're capped at that 2 times thing. Third one, that 95% thing on there, don't worry about it. Nobody ever uses it. But the key here is that for most people, you're only going to buy 1 or 2 properties. You can identify up to 3 properties. When we get to this point with the clients, we talk to them about this in depth. So don't feel that you need to be an expert in their identification. All right. How much do you need to reinvest to do the exchange? The answer is very simple. All of it. Not the equity, not the profit, everything. If you sell the property for $1 million, you need to go buy at least $1 million. Now, can you go more than $1 million? Absolutely. Can you go less than $1 million? Yes, but you pay tax on the difference. So if you sell for $1 million, buy it for 900, that's called boot. Boot is what you pay tax on. So that $100,000 that you didn't reinvest, you pay tax on that. So you can buy lower, you just pay tax on the difference. Secondly, all of the cash, all of the equity from the sale of the property has to go to the new property. If you get too big of a loan and you have cash left over, you pay tax on. I had a situation last year where a woman sold her house in Palo Alto for $3 million. We had $3 million in her exchange. She goes to buy a shopping center in Florida for $3.8 million. The lender says, "Hey, if I give you $1 million loan, I can get you a better interest rate." She said, "Okay." But guess what? Because she got a bigger loan than she needed, she had $200,000 left in her exchange account. She had to pay a tax on that. So again, key here is equal or greater, use all the cash. So obviously what that means is there is debt on that. If there's debt on the property, you have to replace the debt also. Now, what you can think of though is you can either replace the debt with another loan or with your own cash. If you do not want to get another loan and you have cash in your pocket, you can use that to replace the debt also. So equal or greater, use all the cash. By default, the debt is going to need to be replaced in there. Anything that you touch, you pay tax on. So how's the way to look at this? Real simple. Did you buy something equal or greater in value? And did you use equal or greater all the equity from the sale of the property? As long as you did all that, then you're deferring all your taxes. All right, there's some myths in exchanges I want to run through real quick. First one, exchangers have to swap property with people. I still get people, especially older people, because this is actually how 1031s used to be. I like your duplex, you like my fourplex, we would swap real estate. And again, that's how 1031s used to be. There's still a lot of realtors out there who were part of exchange clubs back in the 60s and 70s, and that's how they would do it. They would find people in exchange real estate. That's not the case anymore. 99.9% of exchanges, you're selling to one person, buying from another. You're not swapping properties. Also, I still get a lot of people who think 1031s have to be simultaneous, where they buy and sell the same day. Again, that's how it used to be. But as of 1984, Congress amended the 1031 rules to put in the 45 and 180 days. So they no longer have to be simultaneous like they used to be. I still get a lot of people who call me that are very afraid that 1031s are very expensive and very messy, only for really expensive properties. Not the case at all. I set up exchanges for properties worth less than $100,000 very commonly. Okay, it's about $1,000 to do an exchange, just a couple pieces of paper to sign. Not difficult at all. Don't let people get scared about it. Also, there's a fear that if you do an exchange, you will get audited. Again, not true. The IRS is looking to make sure you did it right. But as a rule, just because you did an exchange does not mean you are more likely to get audited by the IRS or Franchise Tax Board. There's also common misconception. I even hear this from accountants, that you can't do an exchange on a property if you also live there. Not true. Again, as we showed earlier, a property can be dual use. You live in part of it, rent out part of it, or use your business for part of it, or have a farm where you're living on it and farming the rest of it. It's possible for property to be dually used at the same time. Lastly, that I get the question, what is the role? Do we even need an intermediary, or can just somebody in my family hold the money? The answer is no. You are required to have a 1031 intermediary every time you do an exchange, and it specifically cannot be anybody with whom you already have a relationship, like family members or an attorney or a realtor or a lender or a CPA. It has to be a neutral third party. That's all we do is exchanges. We do not act in any other capacity. So real common myths here. Before I go too much farther, one thing I do want to point out is many of the things we've talked about today, I have a one-page PDF that describes it. So if any specific topic you want to get into greater detail on, send me an email, give me a call. I can send you some more information to get into any of these topics in greater detail. Also, I do have a newsletter if you're interested on 1031 exchanges. It comes out once a month. Our next one's coming out next week. If you're interested in getting our newsletter, again, send me an email, give me a call. I'll add you to the list. Again, it's only once a month. All right, red flags. What are some of the problems we run into when it comes to exchanges? Number one, family. There are restrictions within the 1031 code when you do exchanges with family members. So bottom line here is if you're dealing with family, if anybody is buying, selling real estate as part of a 1031 exchange with family members, please call me because there are a lot of restrictions to this. A very common question I get, hey, I'm going to do a 1031 exchange and I'm going to go buy my daughter's house from her because she's having trouble making payment. Can't do it. You cannot buy your daughter's primary residence or kid's primary residence as the replacement property. The IRS will blow that up immediately. So again, key here is anytime 1031s want to be done with family members, please call me. Sometimes it's okay, sometimes it's not, depends on the situation. Seller financing. Seller financing isn't too common with residential real estate in urban areas. It's very common for commercial real estate. It's very common in rural areas, but seller financing and 1031s don't mix. If you got someone who wants to sell a property and the buyer is asking them to carry a note, please call me. There are ways around it, but as a rule, seller financing and 1031s are a bad idea. Vesting. Important thing here is it has to be the same taxpayer buying and selling. You're selling, you're buying. If you want to do any changes to the vesting, sometimes it's okay, sometimes it's not. Like for example, you and your trust are the same entity. So you can sell in the trust, buy in your own name, that's okay. But if you own the property in a partnership and then you want to dissolve the partnership and buy the replacement in just your name, that's not okay. That's the changing of the taxpayer from the partnership to you. That's not good. Even adding a spouse is a problem. So again, the key here about vesting is it needs to be the same taxpayer buying and selling. If it's not, call me. We'll walk through it. Around here, very common for people to be working with sellers who are not U.S. citizens or residents. It is possible for non-U.S. citizens or residents to do exchanges. I do them all the time. However, there are special rules. Primarily, escrow will be probably required to do the FERPTA withholdings for federal taxes. Also, it is required that they have a tax ID number or social security number, they can get a temporary one. The reason I bring up foreign sellers is if you are working with foreign sellers, then just bring this up to both the title company and to us early in the transaction so we can let you know what special rules they need to follow. So again, it's not that they can't do exchanges, it's that we have special rules, and sometimes these things can take weeks, if not months, to get sorted out. So the earlier we address them, the better. Lastly, security. Reason I bring this up is as an industry, the intermediaries, we are not regulated. Please make sure you only work with very large companies who have lots of bonding insurance guarantees that your client's money is being protected. Don't let your client go on the internet, find somebody who's to do the exchange just because they're cheap. And there's so many security issues right now with wire fraud and stuff. Stick with big companies. The cost of an exchange is way too cheap to jeopardize your money over for $100. All right. So why do people do 1031 exchanges? Most people would think, well, what they're looking to do is just to defer taxes. And that's not why you do 1031s. Okay. You don't do a 1031 to defer taxes. It's the easiest way to defer taxes is just don't sell it. Okay. The reason you do exchanges is because you want to do something better with your property than you own today. In other words, you want to buy something better than what you own today. So you might want to be diversifying your property. Maybe you want to sell 5 houses to buy a shopping center. Maybe you're going to move to Arizona, so you want to move your properties to Arizona. Maybe you're looking for better cash flow. Maybe you're looking, maybe you ran out of debt and you need new depreciation. I just did one yesterday. I'm setting up an exchange where a woman is selling a property and buying 3 properties because she knows her kids fight too much. And so she's going to buy 3 properties so that each kid gets a new property and they're not going to fight over it. So the key here is when you're talking to a client who owns a piece of investment real estate, it's not, do you want to do an exchange? Do you want to defer taxes? Is what is a better property for you tomorrow than what you own today? And I kind of want to get into this because now I'm going to talk about, what am I seeing in regards to the market today? And the truth is, I'm seeing a lot of people leaving California. So they're selling their property in California and buying property in other states. Some of it's political. Some of it is because they expect to either immediately or in the future relocate to Hawaii or North Carolina or Idaho or wherever. Sometimes it's just a matter of cash flow. I mean, if you get a $2 million property in the Bay Area, you may only be getting $4,500 or $5,000 a month in rent. $2 million in the Midwest is going to buy you an apartment building that's going to get you 3, 4, 5 times that kind of revenue. So, whether it's cash flow or political or lifestyle planning, a lot of people are exchanging, are going outside California. Another thing I'm seeing, which I think is a good marketing opportunity, there are some markets, I'm thinking specifically of San Francisco, where a lot of real estate in San Francisco has really gone down in prices. You can get condos in San Francisco right now really inexpensively compared to where they have been. So I'm doing a lot of exchanges right now where people are taking advantage of this and buying properties in markets like San Francisco that they, for a long time, thought was way too expensive to buy into. So it's kind of an interesting move that people are getting into. Now, mind you, a lot of these people are buying properties that ultimately they plan to move into. We'll get into that in just a minute. But that's it's kind of two different strategies. One going into San Francisco, a lot of people leaving San Francisco are kind of the trajectories that a lot of people are seeing right now. All right. Last thing, when you do deal with people who are sick of owning investment real estate, usually these are older people that are retired. There are some taxes. I never recommend talking about dying as an exit strategy, though the reality is ultimately if it goes to their heirs, that's the best exit strategy because they get to avoid all the taxes that way. Seller financing. I mentioned seller financing earlier. Seller financing as part of a 1031 is not a good idea. However, seller financing on its own is a very good idea. My father, when he retired, he was done with real estate, period. And what he did is he sold it under seller financing, and for 20 years he got a check every month, and it was a great way for him to supplement his income, and more importantly, he got to defer paying taxes because his tax bill was stretched out over the term of the note. So seller financing as an exit strategy is a good idea. Seller financing with 1031, bad idea. This is probably another very common one where you're going to go buy a property and that you're ultimately going to move into. I do exchanges a lot for people who buy properties in the villages or in the Sun City communities or the Del Webb communities. These are people, a lot of them in their 50s, and they're figuring, I'm not going to retire for a few years, but I'm going to go buy a property, do a 1031 exchange into a retirement community that ultimately I'm going to move into. Or they know that they're going to ultimately move to Hawaii or Florida or wherever they're going to move to. You do a 1031 exchange, you rent out the property for a few years, and then later convert it to your retirement home. It is not a good strategy to move into those properties and then sell them right away or sell them after a couple of years because you don't get the full tax advantage in doing that. But if you're looking to do an exchange into a property that you're going to live in many, many years, then that is a good tax strategy. Again, they have to be renting it first. How long they have to rent it for is up to their accountant. Most accountants are going to recommend at least a couple of years. But ultimately, this is a good strategy. Again, we talked about estate planning. The last thing you can do is buy properties that are less maintenance. Triple net commercial real estate is really good. A lot of seniors are afraid of doing exchanges because they can't qualify for a loan because they don't work anymore. Well, one thing is if they're going to buy commercial real estate loans don't matter how much money you make. What they care about is what does the property itself make. So as long as the property is generating income, they will get the loan. So it's actually sometimes easier for people who are retired to get commercial loans rather than residential loans. Lastly, there is something called a TIC, or most commonly now, they're called Delaware Statutory Trust or DST. These are fractional ownership of commercial real estate. Fractional ownership of commercial real estate is a strategy where you basically buy into a pooled product where somebody manages it, just gives you the monthly cash flow. If you want to talk to people who are selling any of these products, let me know. I can put you in contact with it. But other than that, that's pretty much it. So, again, the 1031 in and of itself, not a difficult process. You got to sell something, you got to buy something. That timeline is far and away the most important thing. I do not see 1031s going away or changing anytime soon. So don't let your clients get worried about that. I don't see capital gain taxes going up anytime soon. So I'm not worried about that. Jody, are you back with us?
Yes, I am.
All right, so I will pass it back on to you. I will let you go ahead and ask the questions that are in the chat box or the Q&A, and then we will open it up to everybody else who wants to just chime in and raise your hand. I'll let her tell you exactly how to do that. But just one last thing I just do want to mention, I'm here to be a resource for you guys. Been doing this a long time. A lot of you guys already know me, but feel free to let me know how I can best help you. So Jody, go ahead.
I'll unmute myself. That helps. So we got a couple questions in here. The first one from towards the beginning, if a client did a 1031 exchange and later lost the next properties invested, more than one, to default, what happens? Are taxes still due even though all 1031 exchange monies were lost?
Good question. A lot of it depends on what the ultimate on what they ultimately did with those properties, because the key is if you end up with the property, let's take a simple example. You make $1 million profit on the first property, you buy a property and it goes down in value, and then you sell it. Well, net, you still may have a gain in those properties. If you lose those properties completely, the question is, ultimately there is still considered to be a transfer price, and that transfer price, the question is, how does that compare to what your overall gain is? So I know a lot of people back in 2008, 9, 10 who lost real estate, and when they lost the real estate, they still had a capital gain tax to pay on them, especially if they really over leverage those properties. So just because you lose the property to some kind of foreclosure action or some kind of something where everything has gone down in value, there still may be tax liability. It's impossible to give it a complete swipe because it really depends on the individual situation.
Okay. At some point you mentioned 45 days. So the question is 45 days including weekends or 45 business days?
45 calendar days. So January 1st, February 15th, or February 14th. So there are calendar days. And again, even if the 45th day is a weekend, that's when it's due. You do not get the next business day.
Okay. Can you address selling multiple properties in an exchange and how the timeline works?
Great question. So let's take it both directions. You can sell one property and buy multiple properties, no problem. You can sell multiple properties to buy one replacement property, also no problem. The key is, if you are going to sell multiple properties to buy one replacement, the 45-day clock starts when the first property closes escrow. So if you do have a situation that you want to sell 2 or 3 properties to buy one replacement, ideally, you're working with one real estate agent who's in charge of all of them. And what I would suggest is, like, the first one that goes into contract, ask for a really long escrow, like 60 or 75 days. Hopefully that way you get the second one and third one into contract so they close relatively close together in time. Technically, as long as they all close before you buy the replacement, you're in good shape. But for practical purposes, ideally, you're going to want to try to close them relatively close together in time. If I have a client right now who's trying to sell 8 properties to buy one replacement, for them, what we're going to do is a partial forward exchange and a partial reverse exchange, where they're going to sell a few beforehand And the ones they can't, we'll do the reverse exchange on and sell the rest later. So it's possible to combine, if you're really selling a lot of properties, it's possible to combine a regular exchange and a reverse exchange. But the key is the day the first property closes, that starts the clock for everything.
Okay. How does the seller prove that they have identified and found their replacement property?
We provide a form to them. Once escrow closes, we send them a letter saying, hey, we started your exchange. Here's how much money we're holding. Here are your deadlines. Here's the form that you will fill out and get back to us by the 45th day. So that comes to us.
Okay. And are you seeing specific locations where this is happening? Like more than
I
others?
literally have probably done exchanges to 45 states in the last year. Everywhere. People are going everywhere. There are a couple of states though that are coming up that started coming up much more. Idaho right now, really popular. Nevada, still popular. Same thing with Texas, Florida. Those are always kind of popular. North Carolina is also one that I'm seeing a more people go to than before. But I probably literally have done exchanges to almost every state in the country in the last year. I've even done exchanges to North Dakota. Yeah, Idaho and North Carolina are the ones that are the more recent ones that I'm seeing more frequently.
I hear of more and more people retiring in Idaho. Eagle, Idaho, I think, is one of the cities that's become popular. I hear of a lot. So that makes
sense. It's funny too, because part of my service territory is Fresno. And I swear to God, the high-speed rail should not come to San Francisco. It should go straight from Fresno to Boise, because everybody from Fresno is moving to Idaho.
Interesting. That is interesting. What kind of fees are associated with 1031 companies that someone should expect?
Again, for the most part, you're looking at around $1,000. For us, it's $850 when you sell and $250 when you buy, so about $1,100. But the cost of a 1031 is nominal. For most clients, they're paying a heck of a lot more in escrow, title, and other fees, but about $1,100.
That's a lot lower than I thought you were going to say, honestly. There's no more questions in the chat box. Does anybody have a question? You can actually raise your hand if you'd like, and I will unmute you so you can ask your question, or you can still put things in the chat box or in the Q&A box. I got one in there. Hold on one moment, please. $1,100 for any price? I think that's why I was shocked. I was thinking we got like a sliding scale, like the more it is, the more the fees are.
If it's an expensive commercial project, I may charge a little bit more for a big commercial project. But for residential, it's a flat fee. The paperwork is the same whether the property is 100,000 or 10 million.
Now, here's a question. So somebody asked about multiple properties. So if you're like the one you gave an example, you're selling 8 properties to buy one. Is it 8 fees, or is it one fee?
It's per account, so it's $850 for the first property and then $250 for each additional property bought or sold.
Got it. Okay. And we do have one question, so I'm going to allow you to talk, and it's either Gianna or Gina. So when you come on, you let me know. I think it's Gianna though. So okay. So if you'd like to speak,
and you can unmute yourself, Gianna.
There you go.
There I am. So I was the one that asked Ron the first question, because that was me that did the 1031, but that was in 2000. That was during the 2005 scary time. So I did.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to have to deal with the IRS on my problems no matter what, no biggie, but it helps to understand from your explanation how they look at what happened. So I don't think we're going to run into these problems going forward. I certainly hope not, because it looks like a lot of things got corrected, from the Dodd-Frank up till, we're dealing with it now. So I just was wondering, what's a good way for an agent to become more familiar so that they can actually list a 1031 exchange, like a specialty in what we can bring to a client without saying that we're an expert, because I obviously would send them over to you, if that's what they want to do.
It's interesting. I get that question a lot, but then again, I also can say that I work with literally 3 of the top 50 real estate agents in the entire country, and including many, very successful realtors here in the Bay Area. And almost to a number, almost to a T, they all handle 1031s the exact same way. They all basically say, hey, you got a question, call Ron. And they don't even talk about the 45-day rule with these guys. They don't want to answer any questions about them. So
Okay.
that's how some really of the top agents do it. My suggestion obviously is you're going to want to have worked on it with a few clients on it when it comes to exchanges, just so you have. And for some reason, my dog keeps opening my door here. Sorry.
Interested in 1031s.
I could tell. I think he wants me to hear my wife, who's giving a Zoom class in the other room. But anyway.
They need attention, Ron. You know, it doesn't matter. They don't care about Zoom.
No, exactly. No, I can give you some reading material. Our website has fantastic information on exchanges if you want to get more detailed about it.
Right.
But if you want to read more about it, I definitely have material that you can read. Again, the main thing I always tell realtors is don't feel that you have to become an expert.
Okay.
If you've done a couple of exchanges with clients, you kind of know what the steps are, but there's really not nearly as much involved as most people think there is.
That sounds good. And I think the most experience I did get was going through it myself with the process. And it was painful, but because I obviously I wasn't, I didn't know exactly who I was working with. So this is great because it really is important to be able to trust who we're handing our client over to. And I feel much better about it now.
Good.
So I will continue to learn, though. Thank you so much for your time.
No problem.
Okay.
It sounds like Ron sits also on our commercial council here at SCORE. And what we hear a lot is don't do it yourself. Don't try to do it yourself. Build a relationship with somebody who can do it and who's the expert in the room. And Ron is your expert in the room. So when you have questions on these things and we have clients looking for these things, you now have his contact information. And just like those other top agents, they don't try to know. It's good to be educated about it, but they just refer him to Ron to answer those questions.
All right. Anybody else have their hand raised?
Nope, I don't see any other hand raised, and I don't see any more questions. So Ron's information, I put it into the chat box. ron.ricard@ipx1031.com is his email address, and it is on the screen right now that's being shared with everybody.